Thank you for joining this webinar. I'm going to walk you through the basics of analysing a survey. We've put this together for survey beginners, but for more experienced people out there, I promise you a few really cool time-saving tips along the way. If you've got any questions as we go along, chuck them into the questions field in the GoToWebinar app. I'm only going to get through to them at the end unless they're kind of, Tim, I can't hear anything type messages, in which case I'll try and address them a bit faster. We're going to walk our way through a case study of a fictional product called the iLog, but it's a real data set. We went out and did our own survey. I'll give you a moment to read the concept description. I'm going to take you through 8 stages of analysing a survey. The first stage is getting data in the right format. And this is actually the biggest mistake that people make when they analyse surveys, I think. Beginners, they click the export button in the data collection software or talk to a vendor, and they get an Excel or a CSV file. Why? Because I think they've heard of these things before. But Excel and CSV files were not designed for survey analysis. You can use them if it's all you can get. But it really increases massively the amount of time it takes to do work and the amount of technical expertise you need. And so the biggest win for people usually is to work out how to get a better format, one specifically designed for survey data. Now, there are quite a few good ones out there, and the best is often to integrate directly with the data collection platforms into your analysis tool, but the industry standard is something called an SPSS.sav or SAV file. Now, Emily has sent through the message, is anybody else able to see the slide deck? And my screen is telling me that it is being shared, but can somebody just confirm that you're seeing it and the problem is just with Emily? Hopefully just with Emily having it on a different screen. Thank you. Well, you guys have found the thumbs up way. I don't even know how to do that. Nice. That's a lovely little ticker tape coming through. Awesome. So Emily, maybe it's hiding in a different screen. Oh, and she's got it. Cool. All right. Now, what's the difference between the different file formats? Well, what I'm calling the bad file formats, they're like a toolbox. You just chuck anything in any spot. And so it makes it really slow to find things and hard to check if you've actually got the right things. The better file formats have a place for all of the types of data, making it much easier to work with. Now, it's a little trickier than just getting a good file format because you can have a good file format and people still put things into the wrong spot. We've got another webinar all about stop cleaning, all about how to clean your data, which talks about this topic in a little bit more detail. And more generally, we have other more detailed webinars on every single thing that we're going to talk about today. Now, once you've got your data, there's a very standard workflow for how you clean and tidy it. And the way this workflow goes is you work your way through all of the questions in your survey, or more generally, the sets of variables in your data. And you go through and you create a whole lot of summary tables for all of your data. You check each table one by one, looking for signs of dirt. If the summary table is dirty, you clean it or tidy it. And maybe if there's real problems, you delete some of your responses or respondents or rows of your data. That is where you look at them and think this data is just garbage. I don't believe it's from a real person or they haven't been trying. Then we delete it. Let's make our way through a live example. So I'm going to suck in the data. I'm using the SPSS data file format that I talked about before. Here's the data for the concept test that I shared at the beginning. Now, when I import the data, I can see all of the questions that I've asked in the survey down the left-hand side, which is my first sign that I've got a pretty neat data file. If I couldn't make out what these were, they were little weird names, it'd be warning me that I had a poor quality data file. Now, as I mentioned, we need to create summary tables for everything. So let's go through and I will go report summary tables. Now I'm showing you everything in Displayr. Most of the things I show you can be done in Q as well. The workflow is a little different, but all the math and underlying stuff is the same. So I've got my little report here. As I said, we're going to go through the tables one by one. Now, in a survey, each person is typically given a unique identifier, a number or a code, and that's what we're looking at here. And the first check that we do is to make sure that we don't have one person doing the survey twice. And we do that by looking for duplicate response ID numbers. Now, the workflow in Displayr and Q for checking a data file is usually involving creating new variables. And so in Displayr, I select the data that I want to look at, response ID. I click this button here, which will insert a new variable, and then I can choose from them. Now, a lot of the things we're going to choose are from the data quality group, but we've got this nice new feature where we recommend things. And as you can see, it's recommending that I create a new variable that shows me duplicates, which I will do. And I'm just going to drag that variable set up into my tables, which will cause a table to be created. And happily, I've got 100% of people with no duplicate IDs, so I'm happy. And I'm just going to delete the response ID and the duplicates data because having checked it, I don't need to look at it again. If it was something like a tracking study, I wouldn't delete them because I'd want to go back and review them when my data updated later. So my next table is showing the status of the responses. And I've got a problem. I have 275 responses that are partial. Now, one of the terrible bits of advice that many websites give on market research and surveys is that you should let it be optional for respondents whether they should complete a question or not. This is just horrible advice. Pretty much no professional ever follows that advice because it makes the data unusable. So we're going to delete all of these partial responses. Now, we have to jump through a little hoop in both Displayr and Q. You can't just delete the rows of data. What you've got to do is you've actually got to go and for the data set, and in Q, this would be in the data tab, we need to tell it what the unique identifier we want to use, which is the response ID. And the reason we do this is so that when we update the data later, because maybe we get a new data file, because we've got some new responses or something like that, telling it the response ID means that it'll be able to delete the same respondents automatically for us, so we don't have to manually redo this work. So, and the way we're going to do it is we're going to look at the raw data for status by viewing it in the data editor. We'll sort it. And I'm just going to select all the partial responses. Now, at the moment, you can see it's telling me I've got 575 cases of data. I'm going to delete the rows containing these partial responses. And it's now telling me I've deleted 275 cases. And I'm just going to delete this table. Like in the kitchen, you delete as you go if you remember to. Duration is how long it took the questionnaire to complete on average in seconds in this case here. Now, previously, everything in Displayr has shown us percentages, and Q works the same way. And it's showing us percentages because in the data file, one of the fields is the data numeric, text, or categorical? And everything so far has been shown as categorical, so Displayr automatically shows us percentages. But this one here, it's been set in straight numeric data. And that's why it's showing us the average. And so if I wanted to, for example, see it as categories or percentages, what I could do is I would change the data type. And then it would show me percentages. Let's change it back. It's numeric. Now, when you have duration data, and you should use duration data, you view it. You could use a histogram if you wanted to, but often it's just easy to sort the raw data, which I'm doing here. And we want to get a feeling for whether we have people who've completed the survey in probably short amount of time. And such people we call speeders, and we delete them. Now, in my data set here, it's a very short survey. The fastest person has done it in 2:27 seconds, which I think, if I'm doing my math right, is 3 minutes and 47 seconds. And that's plausible. I'm not trying that hard, but I don't have to delete them, I think. So I won't worry about the speeders then. Again, I'm going to delete the table. The next bit of data I have is user language. Now you can see it's listing each response as user language. We're just seeing the raw data. And the reason it's doing that is in the underlying data set, this has been put in as text data. So it's got the wrong structure. And so I just need to change that, tidy up the metadata. And they're all in English. But again, I don't really care. It wasn't meant to be a multilingual survey. So I'll delete that table. I duplicated it, not so clever. Oh, I did it twice. All right. My competence is not good today. I've got some data on the panel, which is where the data has been sourced from. I don't really care about that, so I'm just going to delete that table. And we come to gender. As you can see, we've got a third gender, and again, we've got some missing information. We haven't written down that. Maybe it said non-binary. I don't know. You'd want to go and investigate that normally, but I've got no data, so I'm just going to ignore it and go delete. And so now I've tidied up the data itself. Now, a key aspect of how both Displayr and Q work is, although I interacted with the table, it's actually saved the change into the underlying data. So whenever I use gender from now on, it's going to have that category removed. I'm going to keep this table because often people want to know the gender profile later. Now we've got the data on age. Usually surveys screen out people aged less than 18, so there'll be 0%. This is just a test that will be successful. I don't need it. I can delete this category from the table. It involves tidying up a bit. Here we've got data on state. You generally go with a very much of an eyeball thing when you look at this, and I should have been a bit clear about this. With gender, you also want to look at your gender information. You want to say, is it consistent with the population? Now, my survey here is from North America, and 51% of people are female last time I looked. So there's a small overrepresentation of women in this survey. If I look at the ages, the age categories, they're broad, they're not massively different. They're not quite right. There's clearly a little too few people in the 55 to 64 category, maybe in the 65-year-old category. It's a bit marginal, so I'm not that worried about it. I'll talk more about that later. With state, it's very hard to read the table like this. I like to just turn it into a visualization. And Kaylee asks, this will be a recording? Of course. My vanity is such, I just assume you'll want a recording of this. Now, here's the map of states. Now, with state data, with age and gender, you do want to go, are these percentages about right? With state, due to sampling, we're going to have a lot of small categories and it's not very meaningful. We just want to check there's nothing super weird going on. And we're seeing that the biggest states, California, Texas, Florida, New York, and maybe Pennsylvania, have got the most number of responses in it. So basically all things a bit right. Illinois is pretty big, North Dakota, Montana, pretty small, based on my watching of 1883. That's about right. Population density. This bottom category is really, really small, people living in small towns. Now, while that might reflect what's true, when we collect most of our demographic data, we're doing it to see if other data differs by demographic group. And there's just too few people in this study for it to be that interesting, or in this category. So I'm just going to merge the bottom two categories together. First category of education is empty, get rid of it. Okay, now we've got data about income, and a bit of laziness in this data file setup. Rather than calling income, it's still got the original questionnaire wording, which can be useful, but in this case I don't want it because I prefer all my reports and tables to have a shorter, more accessible title. So I'm just going to rename it. The second thing we've got here is that some idiot, and that would be me, has collected way too many income categories. And so it's very hard to understand this. Now, we could go through and merge a whole lot of categories, but it might be more interesting to look at the average. So again, we restructure the data, make it numeric. And we've got average income of 17.7. Now, some of you who are good at empathizing with software may assume it's 77,000, but it's not. It's actually saying the average income is 17.7. So we need to check that. And what we need to check is that the values that have been recorded for these categories are correct. So we click on values. And what we can see is that what's gone wrong here, the reason we've got an average of 17.7 is that anybody who said under $1,000 has got a value of 1. Anybody who said $1,000 to $3,000 in income is a value of 2, and so on. And so the average of 17.7, if we go down here, it means maybe an income of 35,000 to 40,000, assuming we had the same number of people in each category. Which we're not going to have. So the standard fix for this is to do something called midpoint recoding. It might sound a bit dodgy, but it's actually pretty accurate. And what you do is you say, okay, this first category under 1,000, let's just assume that means $500. Second category, 1,000, 3,000, let's assume that's 2,000. And so we replace the values with the midpoints of the categories. That's a bit painful to do. So what I'm going to do is we're going to automate it. I'm going to choose the category, the variable again, create a new variable, and I could search for midpoints, but fortunately, it's recommending that I do midpoint, so I'm just going to automatically do it. And I'm going to drag the data up. I'm just going to replace in the table the original family income with the recoded version. And I've got an average income here of 63,000, which seems sensible. Put a dollar sign at the front. Cool. The next bit of data asks what people like about the product. Now, again, I'm going to rename the underlying data. And this is immediately followed up with a second question about dislikes. And in a second, I'll rename the table. I've got to remember to rename the little variable. Okay. Now, notice that the first person has given us a gibberish response. But in the likes, I said, and maybe this is one of those cool initialisms that young people use, and I just don't know, but I think this is probably garbage data. Now, a standard data cleaning thing for text data is to read through it all and identify bad responses and probably delete them. Some people just ignore the bad responses in the text data. I will delete the data because all of the other responses, we've got no way, all the other questions, we've got no way of knowing if it's bad. Like if someone said male, we don't actually know they're not male. So they could, all numeric data can be bad. But with text data, if it's bad, it's probably a good chance that the numeric data is bad. Anyway, so if you're using Q, you'll need to manually read through them. If you're using Displayr, it's got a nice little AI tool. Now, we're only rolling this out for everybody. For some users, you might still want to, all of our current users, if you have hooked up an OpenAI account to Displayr, you can do what I'm about to show you. But in a couple of weeks, I'm saying fingers crossed, because I said a couple of weeks last time I did a webinar. In a couple of weeks, this feature will be rolled out to everybody, and you won't need an account. But I'm going to go and I'm going to choose this option called Poor Text Data. And this is going to identify, using these two input variables, it's going to create a new variable for me, flagging anybody who the AI thinks has poor data. And since it's added a new variable for me down here, we'll select these variables, we'll review the raw data. So hopefully you're getting an idea for this workflow now. We'll sort them descending. I'll make these columns narrower so you can see them all at the same time. Okay, so response 1, who we looked at before, has told us they like the Joomla and they dislike the Nukun. I think they are a dodgy response, so I'm going to delete them. And this, don't believe this person, don't believe this person. I'm not happy with that. I had to be right. Yep, no, you're gone. This one here, remember, it likes, it may lock up and lock you out. It's clearly not a like. Some people might leave him in. Gone. TG, I don't know what that means. Could be good, could be bad. Again, don't know. All right, so look how cool the AI has done. It's very quickly identified all the bad responses, but I can use my judgment and we'll delete them. Okay, now with text data, that's cleaning it. Tidying it usually means categorizing it. I'm just going to do the dislikes in the interest of time, and I'm going to do it super fast. We'll We've got other webinars on this, and we'll shortly do a new webinar on TextCat, but because we keep updating features. So take the dislikes again. It's going to recommend we do something. Text categorization. Good work, Displayr. I'm going to tell it to create 10 themes automatically. Now, just like when you do segmentation, 4 is often the correct number of segments. When you're trying to get a quick summary of the themes in data, 10 tends to do a pretty good job. Magic numbers in market research. And I'm going to automatically classify the responses. Now, you can tweak this stuff. You can add new themes. You can give more specific instructions. You can manually put things into themes, but let's have a look. So person 1 has been given the code or classification of 1, which means price concerns, and that's consistent with what they said. Person 10 said nothing, and that's nothing to dislike, which is our biggest category. All right. Person 3 says may only be for iPhones, Apple exclusivity. Right, so it's done a reasonably good job here. I'm going to save that out. And so now I end up with more variables which I can manipulate. So again, I'm going to drag these across and replace the raw data in my table. And let's sort these from highest to lowest. And cool. So I've got a very quick summary of the dislikes now. Come back to that later in interpretation time. The next bit of data asks which phrase from those below describes how likely it will be to buy the product. Now, in industry jargon, we call this purchase intent. And this is actually the key bit of data in the study, and we'll come back to a bit later, but from a cleaning and tidying point of view, there's no problems with it. The next bit of data asks about similarity of different products. And this is usually referred to in trade as uniqueness. So again, rename the data. From a data cleaning and tidying point of view, it is fine. And here we have data on how well it fits with the brand. Probably getting the pattern here. I'm going to call this brand fit. Now, there are too many categories, I think, to be that useful here. So I'm going to merge together she'll do the bottom 4. Middle 3. There are various kind of rules that market researchers have about when to merge, but they mainly relate to if I've only got 5 options. Most commonly, if we merge the highest 2, which we call the top 2, or the bottom 2, which we call the bottom 2. Anyway, so that's tidied up a little bit. I could tidy up the labels, but I'm sure you want to get onto other things after this webinar. Now, in a concept test, you often will ask purchase intent twice. You first say how likely would you buy it, and then you tell them the price of the product and ask it to them again. And we've done that here. And so we will rename it as purchase intent priced. Again, the data feels clean enough. Lastly, we've got some data on what browser they've used, and who cares? So we'll just delete it. Okay. So we've gone through the stage of cleaning and tidying our data set, variable by variable set or question by question. The next topic is that of weighting. Weighting is also known as sample balancing, calibration, raking, and post-stratification. And the basic idea is that if in the survey you'd identified certain groups in the population which were pretty strongly over and underrepresented, and you can correct them by using a technique called weighting. It's pretty simple. I'm not going to do it now because we don't need to do it. But if we wanted to, and I will say in most surveys I end up weighting them, even if it's small deviations, but I'm trying to keep this introduction reasonably simple. So we do have another webinar on weighting, but if anyone's like, I want to see it in action, just ask me in question time. It's pretty straightforward to demonstrate. So now I'm going to introduce a little technique now. I'm kind of breaking a little bit from the principle of the workflow, and it's the concept of filtering. Filtering is the process of running analyses on only a subset of the data. So I'm going to insert a new page, and we'll take across the dislikes data that we're looking at before. Now, I'm going to duplicate my table here. And I'm not sure if my microphone is preventing my dog's craziness in the background from getting to you, but if you can hear some barking, hopefully knowing the dog is called Sherlock will make it a little less offensive. Fortunately, the dog next door seems to have just woken up, so they're communicating. So I've duplicated my table. I'm going to filter it, and we will look at the data just for the males. Thanks. All right, people like dog barking. Nice. Well, fortunately, Sherlock will happily oblige you with that. All right. Now, on the left, we have the data for the total sample, and you can see it says sample size 282. And on the right, we have the data for just the men. Well, I thought we had the data for just the men, but I've clearly failed. Let me do that again. I'm going to select gender, male, create the filter, and now it's updated. You can see these columns are broadly similar. This is the filtered data showing us 126 responses. Here's the total data. So that's what filtering is about. Now, there are lots of ways you can filter to drill further into the data, but in practice, and definitely do this in a survey pretty often, but in practice, there's a much more efficient way of filtering, which is to create something called a crosstab. And what a crosstab is, you take your initial summary table and then you add a second bit of data to it across the columns. And so now we've got the data for men, and this is exactly the same data as we had when we filtered it, but we've just automatically filtered each column for a different subgroup. We have the data for women, and we've got something called little arrows showing us the differences between these groups, and we'll return to them later, and the data for the total sample. So that's a really efficient way to create filters, which is via crosstabs. We're going to come back to them in some detail. This next topic is definitely something that really pulls apart the novices from the experts. Well before you even look at your data, you should take the time to think about what analyses you want to do. And really, you should come up with this before you even write your questionnaire. There's no standard analysis plan, although there's some kind of principles. And we have a lot more of this on the webinar on finding the story in your data. But I've put together a simple analysis plan for this study, and they really always need to be tailored for this study. So this was the simple analysis plan I came up with for the ILOC survey. And this is a fairly generic one for doing concept tests. Earlier in my life, I've looked at hundreds or thousands, probably thousands of different concept tests. Okay, and we're going to work our way through this little workflow. Now, good old ChatGPT, it's awesome at coming up with analysis plans, actually. It's quite as good as a good researcher yet, but certainly better than novice, so get its help. And we're going to automate that into the app reasonably soon. So this analysis plan, the first thing is the concept viable? Now, with questions asking about purchase intent, you can't really trust people that they're going to accurately tell you the purchase intent, not because they're dishonest, it's just they don't really know, they're just completing a survey. And so typically companies that do concept tests, they keep notes regarding how the concepts that they launched actually scored in the survey. And then they get a feeling for what is a threshold for a successful concept test. And so a lot of companies in FMCG land or packaged goods lands tend to have like a number going. They want to get 25% of people that say would definitely buy, or maybe 60% of people to say they'll definitely or probably buy. Now, if we go back and look at our summary table from before, you can see we've got 12% of people saying that they would definitely buy it. Now, I'm going to turn this into a report page, so I'm going to convert this to a page. And I'm going to take these counts off because they were useful from a data checking point of view, not so useful from showing it to the client point of view. Then we have to add in the slightly sad news. As you'll see, back when I was a consultant rather than a software salesperson, I tended to go for directness of communication. Now, having identified that you've failed to reach the score that you wanted to, for some people is enough to finish your whole reporting process, but usually people are looking for ways to polish that, I know I won't use that expression, to put lipstick on that pig. What are the ways we can maybe fix the concept so that it could become commercially viable? And so we now move into that secondary level of how are we going to figure out what's interesting in the survey. The next thing we want to look at is we want to compare the definitely would buys for the unpriced concept versus the price concept. So we're going to go back to this little page called purchase intent. I'm actually going to drag him, put him underneath the case study group here. I'll explain why later. And I'll go and I'll drag across the price purchase intent. Now, I made a mistake before. I really should have put this comment next to the priced purchase intent. So I'm just going to drag these back. Fortunately, I'm not going to have to rewrite it because it's also 12%. Unfortunately, for poor old Apple, if they wanted to launch the iLock, there's a bit of a problem that this analysis shows us. You see, one thing that you'd like to see, if your concept, nobody said they want to buy, or too few people said you want to buy the product, it'd be goodish news if you found that when you didn't show the price, many more people said they want to buy it, because that would tell you, we need to fix the price point. Unfortunately here, price is irrelevant to people. They just don't want to buy the product. Okay, that's a bit bad news as well. Now, so we looked at the purchase intent day. The next thing in our analysis plan is, what do we got to do? See, this is why you need the analysis plan to remind you. It's easy to lose your way. We're going to look at the branding. What's the brand fit look like? And the messaging, is uniqueness okay? And so we'll go and we'll look at the uniqueness data. Again, I want to share this with the client eventually, so I'm going to convert the table just into a page in the report so I can add some commentary to it. And now I'm going to go very basic here. In a survey, we would tend to, with a concept test, what we're really trying to get out of this question of uniqueness is, are lots of people going, look, it's just the same as everything else? Because then it's very hard to promote the product. If it's not seen as new, it's very hard to get the retailers to carry it. So that's not the problem. It's actually seen as pretty unique. So again, it's bad again for us because we're trying to diagnose why people didn't like it. Let's drag this down to under here because I'm building up my report down here. Then we move on and we look at the data for brand fit. Again, I'm going to do this little standard workflow. I'm going to convert it to a page. Okay, and so unfortunately also here, people aren't going, look, it doesn't fit with Apple brand. There's a small number of people, but most people think, yeah, it kind of fits with the Apple brand, so it's not an issue with branding either. I'm really doing a great job at working out what we don't know. What does the analysis plan have for us next? We want to review the likes and the dislikes. Now, you'll remember I was a bit lazy. I didn't code up the likes, but I certainly have the dislike data. All right. Oops, dislike, here we go. So what do we see? What do they dislike? And this is actually, again, a very, very disappointing page. And for those of you new to market research, I need to warn you something. Most of the time when you do concept tests, you're explaining to a client that it's disappointing. And so you have to get kind of good at that. It's one of those industries where you break a lot of bad news. Now, you can see here, and I think this is actually very bad news for the poor client here. And the issue is there is no specific big problem. Concept is blah. So this is really a poor concept. which is a shame as I kind of came up with it. Okay, let's go back to our analysis plan. So we've gone through the basic stuff. The next up is the very standard thing, which is we want to cross-tab the key questions, and this is the case, the key questions, the price, purchase intent by all other data. And the way we do that is we run a report called Crosstabs, and we're going to click on our price purchase intent. And then we're going to select the data we cared about, which was gender, age, generally not state. You might want to group it up into regions if you wanted to look at that if you're interested. Population density, we'll look at the average income, and let's also look at it by uniqueness, brand fit. Okay, and I've got some tables here. Okay, now looking at them by gender, a few things to note here. We have this arrow. These arrows are telling us that the data is statistically significant. Now, what this is trying to say to us is in any survey, because we just talked to, in this case, about 150 men, 150 women, we're going to get differences in the responses just due to the way we've randomly selected these men and the women. That's called sampling error. And so one of the mistakes in analyzing a survey is to notice big differences between, or to notice small differences between groups and to overinterpret them. And so we usually start from the assumption that the differences are noise, not reliable. And then there's this fancy maths called statistical significance, which we use to tell us if we think the difference might be meaningful and not noise. And it's telling us here that more women are in this ambivalent middle category than men. So this is statistically significant, and maybe we should tell somebody if the data is intrinsically interesting. But with the concept test, we only care if they're going to buy a product. We don't care about the middle point, so it's kind of irrelevant. So there's nothing very interesting to see there. Let's look at it by age. Now with age, we're seeing the significance at the top row here, and there's a really clear pattern. The younger you are, the more likely you'd buy it. And these young people are almost getting up to that 25% threshold. So there's a very strong age effect here. Let's turn this into the report. I'm going to add it to a page and do some work on it. Let's visualize it. I'm going to switch the data around a bit. Now, I could spend a lot of time customizing all the formatting of this, but you tend to find ways you like doing things and then just create templates, which you save. Templates in Displayr are a lot more sophisticated in Q. I'm sorry to say Q users. Let's go in for my stacked column in blues. So I'm going to drag this down here, getting my report going. I'm going to put it under the purchase intent data. All right. Okay, there's not much happening with geography. Maybe the people in the cities are a little more likely to buy, but it's not statistically significant. If you really want to tell your client, you might tell them it's indicative. Education seems more educated, people a bit more likely, again, not that significant, indicative maybe. No difference by income. As you'd expect, the people who thought it was really unique are more likely to buy it, but that's kind of obvious, not so interesting. Same with the brand fit. If they think the brand fit's good, they'd be more likely to buy it, but it's kind of obvious. Okay, so we've done most of our work now. Now with these crosstabs, I'm just going to, the client might want to look at them later. I'm going to move them into a folder. Summary tables, I'm just going to rename it as my appendix. I'm just going to drag that underneath these tables I created before. And so I've got my case study here. I've got the page underneath. I need to add, I'm going to turn this into my executive summary. I'm going to make it very, very simple. Oops, that's not the one I want. Okay, let's go with some powerful formatting. We'll fill it, we'll make it red. All right, just so that no one can miss the point, we'll put a depressing red box over everything else. Make it transparent. I want to make the border transparent. Okay, so that's a summary. Let's select all of that data in our report, share. We could make it as a dashboard. I'm going to send it off to PowerPoint. It's giving me a little report telling me that some of my tables that I've exported are too big for PowerPoint. Okay, and so I've got my exec summary, and I've got all of my reporting, and I'm done. Oops. Now, just finishing this off, so we went through crosstabs, we went through statistical significance, we looked at finding the story, and I illustrated this, and the workflow that I went through was borrowed from what Michelangelo said to the Pope of his day when asked how we create the sculpture of David, which is, I remove everything that's not David, and it's basically delete if it's not interesting. Then organize all of your data into a pyramid structure, which you've seen. You want an exec summary, the key supporting information, your appendix with more detail. You'll see I also followed this pyramid structure and I created my slides. I showed the key conclusion in the title, then there's more detailed information. We've got much more on this on the webinar in finding the story, and another one on crafting the story. And then I added a little bit of lipstick to the pig that we had here. So this is what we've covered. What questions have you got? Please type your questions into the GoToWebinar field and I'll get onto them right now. Let's see what we've got here. Oh, quite a few questions already. Okay, Susan, and I wish I'd seen this before, says the screen is very small, hard to see the details. Can it be bigger? I'm not sure if this is a problem at your end or my end. If other people found, if quite a few, tell us if you found the screen too small, because that's not a bit of feedback I've had before. Yeah, so that'd be good to know. But apologies for that, Susan. Hopefully in the recording that we'll send you'll be better. Kaylee says, will we have access to the recording? Yes, we should. Of course you should. Yes, your team need to watch this. Emily says, is there an easy way to get the census information by region if we have the state data instead of hand coding this? Well, I'm not sure if you mean extract the data. The way I get all the kind of data like this now is I'll do something like this. So go, morning for me. Okay, so I would ask ChatGPT as my first port of call. It answers a lot of these questions quite well. Failing that, go to Google, or failing that, go to the Bureau of Census, which will also have the data for you available. Now, getting the data into Displayr if we're trying to do weighting, you'd usually just cut and paste the table you get in. All right, anyway, I'm not going to make you watch well, you can watch ChatGPT briefly. Okay, Chloe asks, does deleting the responses delete all the data or just the qualitative data on this question? Great question. So in Displayr and in Q, We never actually delete any data. What we do is we hide it from all of the analyses. So you can always undelete it. That's the first thing to point out. So if I go back to my concept test, I could just restore the deleted cases. So don't be worried that the data is lost. When I'm deleting data, there's two basic ways I can do it. So if we go look at these tables, for example, if I were to right-click on this category and go delete, it would delete the data from that category from age. And so I'd never see data on age for 45 to 54-year-olds. It would instead be recorded as missing data. And that's done at the question or the variable level. It doesn't apply to the whole data set. When I deleted the raw data, which I was doing in the data set by right-clicking, going delete, I'm deleting it for all of the responses. Now, the logic here is quite important. If a person has given you clearly nonsensical data on one question, why would you believe any of the other questions' data? That was kind of the approach that I take. But you've got to be a bit careful here. When I first started as a market researcher, which was sadly in a different millennium, my first really important strategic project, I deleted everybody except 7 responses. And it was explained to me I wasn't quite getting the hang of this and that you had to give people the benefit of the doubt. And I do apply that now. But if my question is, what do you like? And they said, blah, 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 I don't regard that. I don't think there is much doubt that they're not taking my survey very seriously. Bart says, do you need to have Displayr? Oh, nice work. The marketing team will be delighted. And I'm delighted too. Remember the custom prompt in text coding. Let's go and have a look at the text coding. We can do that likes data now. So we'll go text categorization, which is again recommended. So when I create, it's going to create 10 themes, but I can go custom prompt and I can tell it whatever I want. I could say, this data is about the car market, which it's not really, but this data is about the car market. Please make sure that you break up the data by attitude and by theme. And you can give, and the more context you give AI, the better a job it will do. Now, there's a split here. It loves context. When you give it detail about what you expect it to do, it'll only do it if it can do it. And a challenge often is people try and find categories in the data, but the data doesn't contain that information. So just keep that in mind. Context, good. Giving it super specific instructions about what you want. For example, a common one is, I want to have codes so that they show both sentiment and the reasons for that sentiment. And that seems a very rational response until you look at the data, right? This person just said nothing. This person said don't have keys. So you can guess the sentiment's negative, but it's really just a guess. So anyway, you could tell it something like, please create as many classification themes as you want to best show the interesting differences between people. Now, this is a very generic specific prompt. If this is all you've got, don't customize your prompt, but I'm just trying to illustrate what happens. And so you give it your custom prompt. You can also give it custom information about how you classify, and so it's come up with these fairly generic kind of prompts. As I said, I find 10 is a magic number. Brian says, g'day, Brian. Long time no speak. Will there be an email follow-up with a recording? Of course there will, Brian. Thank you. Hannah says, do templates update retroactively? I don't quite know what that means, but I'll make some guesses. So if we look at if you change the data and you've put a template on, yeah, it will certainly update things. So remember before I was talking about the age data. Let's go and modify some of the age data. What I might do here is I'm going to unhide, actually I won't unhide the category, that would make more sense. What I might do is I'm going to create a quick table and put it underneath. And so maybe I want to rearrange, and I'll just, what am I going to do? I'll merge together a couple of categories. And so it'll then update automatically. I hope that's what you're asking. If not, give me a bit more information, please. Brian, what AI is built into the tool or envisioned in the next year? Okay, so the AI, the key things in the AI that are built in, when you import data sets, there's this option here use AI to tidy up the variable set labels, which you do if you've got very messy labels. That's built in when you merge together variable sets, which we haven't done here. When you've got quite messy data, it'll come up with new labels. The text categorization is built in. There's some other features, and I haven't shown you some AI stuff here, which AI stuff here is not quite right yet, but it's going to be really good soon. The other kind of thing that I already showed you was the messy data, and there's also a sentiment analysis tool. They both require you to have your own AI connection. We plan to make them freely available to all users very shortly. It's just taking a bit longer than we expected to hook up. The biggest thing that we're going to launch quite soon, we hope, but quite soon in software can turn out to be a long time away, it turns out. Quite soon is we're going to automatically start generating reports for people. And so the idea is you go in, you'll import your data, and then you'll say, give me an automatic report. And it's not going to give you a finished report, but the intent is, and we're feeling pretty confident about this at this stage, the intent is that if you're a novice, it gets you started with a useful report. If you're an advanced person, it saves you a bit of time doing some work. But it's going to be many rounds of iteration for you to give us feedback on that. Anyway, tell us more about what you want as well, Brian. Catherine says, you changed the question names. How would you see them in the original question? And why do that versus just changing the outputs? Sorry, I'm using the Q language. No, that's fine. I speak the Q language. The reason you change them in the data rather than the outputs is, let's say, remember, take the summary table education, right? If I just changed the table to education and then I created a crosstab of, and we'll do it now, we'll say crosstab that by purchase intent. It would go back and it would show the original label, and then it'd have to relabel it. So it's that general principle. You want to fix things at source, and fixing the variables rather than tables is a big time saver. In Q in particular, you always want to tidy up your labels. It just automates the reporting. It means you have to spend much less time in PowerPoint or wherever you're doing your reporting. And let me see if I can find my cursor and look at the next question. All right. So many questions, guys. Catherine says, this was a fairly basic survey layout. Do you deal with more complex segmentation? Look, Displayr and Q can do any type of software, any type of data analysis, literally nothing you can't do in the tools. And they're used to do any type. Like they're pretty widely used tools, and yeah, there's nothing you can't do but ask for specifics or book a sales call. And if you want to do that, if you haven't done that before, go to the website, just click book a demo and somebody will walk you through stuff. Chris also says, yes, it was too small. Thank you, Chris. Is there a way to merge data sets or reports together? Yeah, so data sets, if you go and choose the data set down here, you can click combine and you add by cases or by variables, depending on how you're trying to merge it together. Adding reports together, you just open up multiple reports and you just click copy and paste into the next report, but make sure the data is there because it's connected to the data. So if you haven't loaded in the data, they won't merge that well together. Okay, Emily wants to collapse the state data to census regions. That is pretty straightforward. So we find the state data, click the inserter, and it's going to have some recommendations. Okay, I'm going to write region in the search, and it goes combine United States data to region. And so now we've got the regions. Is there an easy way to create a page for every survey question with crosstabs on it? Yeah, well, a page or a set of pages. It'll be a very big page. So I showed you the crosstabs tool before. Where you can choose, I'll have everything by gender and age, for example. That's one approach. And so now I've got all of these, and you'd use that workflow if your plan is to export them off to Excel or something like that. Another thing we can do, though, maybe this is what you meant, is we might want to have something like this. I get my purchase intent, and then I drag across gender, and then maybe I drag across age. Build up a banner, and I could have gender within age or gender nested by age or so on and so forth. Sorry, I released the mouse on the wrong spot there. Let me try that again. Okay, and so build up big, and you keep adding like this is a big banner table. You could swap the rows and columns around, or you could, my very favorite visualization in the whole world, have what we call a bar chart with skews, where it shows you the categories and just calls out what's statistically significant. Hope that's what you're asking about, Salvatore. Tell me if it wasn't. Jerry says, after exporting the report into PowerPoint, other charts static cannot be changed unless you go back to Displayr or re-export. Well, so if we've got a page, and I'll show you this two ways. So with this chart here, for example, if I were to export it, and I'll just duplicate this to make this point a bit more obvious. Actually, I'll duplicate the chart on the page. Let's try that again. Okay, the one that we're looking at there will go through as an image, and we have many visualizations that PowerPoint doesn't support. And so if they're editable automatically in PowerPoint, you can have fewer options, but any one you can go and go PowerPoint export and change it. So it's going to be Microsoft chart. And now I'll select these two, and I will export them. And I export the whole thing. That wasn't so clever. So I should have just selected the pages I was trying to export. Anyway, so this one is an image, a very high-res image, so it'll still look good. And so it's got like the little rounded corners and stuff like this. This one here is the PowerPoint version of it, and it's a standard editable chart. You can design it if you want to. You can change responses and whatever you want to do. Catherine says, also mentioned a workaround using ChatGPT to help find junk open-ended responses for those of us who don't have the beta tool. What is that? No, I didn't have a workaround for you for that. You just have to have a ChatGPT account, and then you hook that up to Displayr. But you'll need to have an account with the API access. You can certainly get ChatGPT to find responses but it won't actually save you, that are bad, but it won't save you that much time, because you'll then have to go through and figure out, is it row number 2, is it row number 3? Just stay a couple of weeks. I really think we'll have that feature live for you that I showed you for everybody, if you don't want to hook up your own ChatGPT account. I apologize, because I appreciate it's a bit of a pain in the workflow at the moment. Catherine says, thinking about instances for the context in higher ed, parents, students, alumni, faculty, and community members, in particular, can you make a more complete crosstab data supplement or Excel to provide the client the full clean data? Sure. I think I just showed you the generating the crosstabs. Yeah, lots of value. Depends on your kind of job, right? Some of our clients write reports, others just create crosstabs. There's no kind of data manipulation or exporting you won't be able to do, I think. But again, ask us for a demo if you want more information. And we do have a lot of educational institutions who use us for analyzing the student surveys and the like. Monica says, can we filter different crosstabs in a summary grid directly without creating new variables? I create the summary grid by using filter one variable by using another, create the summary grid. No. So some types of software, and particularly the very old market research crosstabs, you create your table and you specify your filters in the columns of the table. The workflow in Displayr is very much one of you generate variables where you create your columns, and it's the same in Qt.
Brian, will the Q research software non-cloud display include any AI functions, either text analysis? Some of the text analysis is in Q, but it doesn't work that well. The challenge with Q is it's a desktop product, and the AI needs to be on the cloud. And it's one of the reasons we built Displayr. I mean, Displayr is built as the replacement to Q. I know a lot of you love Q, but there's just one of the reasons we built Displayr is Q from a technological point of view. It's a bit hard to integrate AI. Eric says, with all of these webinars on Displayr and not in Q, plus the AI being added to Displayr and not Q, should us Q users prepare to switch to Displayr? You don't have to prepare to switch. Look, we've got no intention of turning off Q, but we do regard Displayr internally as the better product. It is built as the replacement. It just because it leverages more technology, but it very much depends on the type of role you've got, right? And the two kind of big reasons to stay with Q over Displayr, right? If your role is primarily about creating tables rather than generating reports, Q does the job. You're not going to miss much in Displayr other than the AI functionality, although as we add more and more AI functionality, it'll become more compelling. We hope for you to switch to Displayr. The other reason to stick with Q, and I hate to say this, but as I'm getting on in ages, it's just such a pain sometimes to learn a new bit of software. And if you can get the old one working, you stick with it. I understand that. Catherine says, the other reason we do the webinars on Displayr, not Q, is Displayr is much more visual. If you did it on Q, it would be a very boring webinar. Hannah says, are there ways to keep the data confidential when using AI tools in Displayr? There certainly are. We use our AI to, we take that very seriously. There's more information to help about that, but we don't believe there's any prospect of any leakage of your data of any kind using AI tools. Do you find it easier to create and modify variables in Displayr versus Q, top two box, rebasing variables, total flatten? I think all of those are much easier in Displayr and will get much more easier. And it's because we have things like these recommendation tools, which I showed you before. The only thing that I really like about Q over Displayr is merging categories in Q is nice. It's just actually easier to build that in a desktop than a cloud-based product. Salvatore, is there a zoom tool on right side to see the slides better? Yes, there is. So I don't know about in the GoToMeeting app, but in Displayr, you've got zoom controls to increase all of that kind of stuff. If you have data breach issues, Q works best, e.g. healthcare. That might be true. I'm not sure about that. I don't think there's ever been a data breach in the Microsoft servers that we use. And the Department of Defense also uses Microsoft servers, so they seem pretty confident. But obviously, if you've got a closed environment, no one can access your networks and you're using it on Q, you will be the safest. I've got to go, everybody. Thank you for all our customers out there. If you weren't a customer, I hope you saw something you liked. Bye now.